Like the flags. Should we leave them there for Canada Day and 4th of July?
Absolutely.
Minister, it's so good to see you. Welcome to Minneapolis. Grab it. Yeah, just hold it up to it.
Yes, here we go.
Oh, there we go. He's here.
Delighted to be here.
So, thank you, Consul General. Thank you to your team. Thank you to the Canadian American Business Council team, Virginia Beckett, Kyle McDonald, Sean Fitzgerald. They organize a lot of these things all around the country and in Canada, and we're really thrilled to be in Minneapolis today. Hello to the elected officials that are here. Thank you for joining us, all the government folks from Canada, the United States, private sector partners. Thank you all for coming. I hope that lunch service will continue right through while we're talking. You and I don't need to eat. We're good.
Yeah.
But y'all should eat. Couple of points of introduction that the Consul General didn't say, and then I'll turn it over to you to say a few things, and we're going to have a chat. You grew up on a farm.
I did.
And you were a Queen's Scout, which I think is like an Eagle Scout here, right?
More or less.
All right. You enjoyed curling.
Yes.
Anybody here know what curling is? Oh, yeah.
Oh, they're from Minnesota, of course.
Minnesota, yes. Excellent. Here's my favorite electoral fact about Minister Goodale, and this comes courtesy of a mutual friend of ours, David Hurley, who, as I was preparing for this, I said, David, what's something that people don't really know about the minister and that is okay to say in public? And he's a pollster in Canada, and so he talked about an election in 2011 maybe, in which there are 14 ridings, that's like a district, in the province of Saskatchewan, and so 14 different seats, and this gentleman actually won 50%, more than 50% of all the votes cast. So it was like he was running in 7 different districts and beat everybody. So that's a fun fact about you. So you're politically popular in your home province.
It's always a fleeting thing.
Well, apparently not with you. But anyway, 2 other fun facts, and then I'll turn it over to you. The Consul General alluded to this, but it's interesting to know that you are in the succession, meaning God forbid something should happen to the Prime Minister, or, if Miss America can't serve her duties, the first runner-up takes over. So you would take over in the official succession, which makes you the Canadian version of Mike Pence. Just saying. Only liberal. The other fun fact is that you were the only person that served in the governments of both Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was a former prime minister, people know, and Justin Trudeau. So at some point, we'd love for you to compare and contrast. But why don't you tell us what you're doing here and what's on your mind?
Well, Scotty, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming today. Scotty, thanks to you and the Consul General for arranging this luncheon. Glad to have this opportunity. In many ways, coming to Minneapolis seems like a very short trip for me because my home is in Regina, Saskatchewan, and that's just more or less up the Sioux line from here. And it's nice to be back again. I've had the opportunity to visit this community on other occasions, not in an official capacity, but more on family business. And you think of the things that are important about the Canada-U.S. relationship. It's partly about geography. It's partly about history. It's partly about the values that we share, the common interests that we share with each other. But it's also about family. And I know in my family. My mother's side comes from Illinois, from Bushnell in the middle of the state, and when I was growing up as a kid on the farm at Wilcox, Saskatchewan, just south of Regina, one summer we'd all come down here and visit my cousins, and next summer they would all come to Canada and visit the other way around, and there's just so many connections like that, personal, family. Relationships that bind us together so closely on the North American continent, and we have between us the longest, most open, most successful international boundary, probably in the history of the world.
Absolutely.
When you think of what that international boundary represents, there are over 400,000 people that go back and forth across that boundary line every single day. And I kind of keep track of those statistics because my responsibility for public safety and the Canada Border Services
And most of them are
agency.
good guys and gals, right?
Well, those encounters happen virtually without incident in the vast majority of cases. Also, importantly, in Canadian dollars, $2.4 billion in two-way trade crosses that border every single day. When you think about those numbers, they are hugely impressive. About 70% of Canada's international trade heads toward the United States. You look at it the other way around, there are over 30 states that are dependent on export trade with Canada. And the top three, Canada is among the top three export markets for 48 of the U.S. states. There are 9 or more million jobs in the United States that depend on trade with Canada. So the relationship is big, it's important, and we really need to work very hard to keep it in good shape. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here and other ministers are elsewhere across the United States, and we frequently welcome American government representatives and business and community representatives flowing back in the other direction.
You're welcoming a lot of Americans who don't want to live here anymore, too, aren't you?
Well, we've got
happening? Just possibly.
No, we've got an interesting border situation at the moment. It's a big border. It's secure. It's efficient. We want to make it more secure and more efficient, and at the same time thinner, more effective for people to deal with. But there are some people who are heading toward the border and making a crossing in an irregular fashion. There are, of course, rules and procedures to follow. And the last 6 months or so, we've seen an increase in the number of people who are going to the border but not going to the port of entry, going around the port of entry and entering Canada in an irregular fashion. And we're working very hard to understand why that is happening, exactly the nature of the migration. It's one of the topics that I discussed today with the governor and have raised in the past with Secretary Kelly. We need to keep a very close eye on that situation because border integrity matters. Border security matters. And we need to make sure that border is efficient and effective and works in good form for people and goods that are crossing legitimately. At the same time, we need to make sure that security issues are taken seriously, and we will do that on both sides.
Okay, I want to unpack that whole border, why people are going to Canada a little bit more. But before we do that, I just want to let everybody here know that there are cards on your table. And so the minister and I are going to chat for a few minutes, and I'm going to ask him the questions that I have. But if you've got a question that you'd like to ask, please feel free to write it down. Use your best penmanship so that we can read it. And if you'd like to be identified, put your name on it. If you wouldn't, put your next-door neighbor's name on it. We also are streaming this live on Facebook. Welcome to all the Facebook people that are out there tuning into us, and you can share it later if you like. And if you're tweeting, hashtag CABC Dialogues. So anyway, lots of ways to get in on the fun. Let's talk for a minute about the differences between Canada and the United States, because we agree that we have a lot in common: family, business, culture, values, all of that. I wouldn't want any other neighbor than Canada. Think of the other borders in the world. Think of India, Pakistan. Think of Korea. Think of Israel. Think of the borders in the world, and then think of ours. We are both truly fortunate, I think. But your colleague, Minister Freeland, the foreign minister, made a big speech in the House of Commons last week, I think, on Canada's foreign policy, and the New York Times yesterday called it the Trudeau Doctrine of Foreign Policy, and I want to ask you a little bit about it. she said something that Angela Merkel had said and recently as well, which is basically, if I can interpret, and you can correct me, that the world, Canada's view of the world is that multilateralism is a lot more important today than it was maybe a year ago. You know, the basic theory being with the election of President Trump and his kind of American isolationism kind of mantra, that everybody's kind of on their own. So I just thought I would ask you a little bit about, if it's all about multilateralism, and all of that, and moving away from the United States, why is it important for you and all your colleagues to continue to come here all the time? I mean, we're happy to have you, but what are you doing here?
Well, multilateralism is not a new phenomenon for Canada. It's something that we have believed in and practiced for a very long time, and Canada was very active in developing the institutions and the architecture of multilateralism in the years following the Second World War. The Bretton Woods Agreement, the founding of the United Nations, and all of the international apparatus that goes with that, being a very active player in other multilateral organizations like the G7. We were the ones who sort of coined the concept of the G20. Paul Martin, when he was Prime Minister, put that item very much on the international agenda. We've been one of the key players historically in international events and activities like peacekeeping, for example. Mm-hmm. So multilateralism is something that is kind of second nature to Canada, and it's something that we have always believed in, always practiced, and I guess that goes with the fact that we are a relatively small country, but one that has a sense of international interest and responsibility, and we want to play that role. And we're not the biggest kid on the block with the sharpest elbows. Even though we did give the United States Gordie Howe, which those elbows are great things. But multilateralism is the way that Canada can exercise, I think, the greatest influence for good in the world, and we've practiced that for the last 70 years. At the same time, we are the next door neighbor to the United States of America. And for any prime minister, making that relationship work is the number one foreign policy imperative. And Mr. Trudeau has worked very hard at that with Mr. Obama's administration, and now with Mr.
Trump's. Remember that, y'all?
And now with Mr. Trump's administration. And the results of that, I think, are showing through. There will be issues and disagreements and problems to solve, but Canada will exercise its influence, stand up for its views and its beliefs and its principles. We'll do that in a one-on-one way when we deal with the United States. And we'll do that multilaterally with the rest of the world through the institutions that we've helped to create since the Second World War.
You mentioned that most prime ministers of Canada want to have a good relationship with the U.S., and I would say some presidents make it harder than others to have a good relationship with the United States. But that, and I would agree that Prime Minister Trudeau, your government, sir, has really shown a lot of self-discipline, actually, in the way you've engaged this administration, and it's been very workmanlike, if I may use that word, and I've been impressed by that. But I mentioned at the beginning, you also worked in the government, you were in the House of Commons with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Relations, maybe during his day, were not quite as warm. And I wonder if you could just, for a little bit of human interest, compare and contrast the father and the son for us, since you know both of them up close.
Now that could be a career-limiting move.
You've had a good career, it's all right.
It's been my
The staff is saying this was not in the briefing notes.
it's been my pleasure and my privilege to work with both of the Trudeaus, Pierre Elliott when he was the Prime Minister, and now Justin. In many ways they are similar people. Obviously, you are your father's son, and the intellect, the engagement, the curiosity, the willingness to wade into some of the most difficult issues and have a good debate and discussion. I think that intellectual curiosity and the courage to deal with difficult public policy issues is something that is common to both of the Trudeaus. Both of them, Pierre in his day and now Justin, show a tremendous work ethic. He is quite literally on the job all the time, and that very active, thoughtful, creative mind is always churning away at issues probably many miles ahead of the rest of us. In terms of differences, I found Pierre Trudeau to be much more reserved than Justin, maybe even shy, even though that wasn't his public persona.
Yeah.
But with Justin Trudeau, he likes to be with people. He likes to engage, and his energy just seems to be magnified and multiplied when he's in a crowd, engaging with people and getting tough questions. I mean, that's something that really animates him. Where his father, I think, was just a little bit more reserved than that.
Yeah, interesting. Continuing on the theme of comparing and contrasting from your personal experience, the Consul General mentioned your portfolios, and I'll just to remind everybody, I won't get them all, but you were Minister of Natural Resources in a country that is really blessed with abundant natural resources of all kinds. You were a finance minister of a G7 country that not only balanced the books, but weathered the 2008 crash, according to independent people, not just blowing sunshine here, better than anybody else, certainly better than the United States. And now you're public safety minister. What's your favorite portfolio? I mean, what's the most interesting of all of those things? What do you like the best of those challenges?
As a farm kid from Saskatchewan, being Canada's Minister of Agriculture was a really exciting thing. You have the opportunity to go around the world and sell Saskatchewan wheat, sell Saskatchewan pork and livestock, sell Saskatchewan potash. Those are exciting things to do, and really touched me in a personal way because I came from a farm. Natural resources, again, that's a hugely important, forestry and energy. Those are. Are
you going to say all your children are your favorite?
No.
Okay, all right.
This will come to a conclusion at some point.
That's okay.
Finance, being Minister of Finance, allows you to involve yourself, wanted or not, in the activities of every other portfolio of government. So you have that kind of central agency role. But actually, with all of them, Public Works was in there as well, right. And Government House Leader. But the role actually that is simply just sheer excitement and exhilaration, public safety.
Really?
Because every day there is something happening in the country, something happening around the world that requires your attention, and it's not a mock run. It is not.
Yeah, it's real life.
It really is.
Yeah.
It matters, and that ups the stakes, but it's certainly a fascinating perspective and you get to work with some pretty interesting people around the world.
Well, let's talk about somebody you work with in that portfolio. I am a real fan of John Kelly. He's the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security. He's a United States Marine. Hoorah. Semper Fidelis, any Marines out there. And I think he's terrific. I had the opportunity to meet him before he had this gig, and we work with him now, obviously, because we care a lot about the way the border functions. So have you met him? What do you think of him? What's your relationship? Talk to us about John Kelly.
I've had the opportunity to meet and to work with John several times now in the last 5 months or so that we've both been in office together. And what I found interesting and a very positive sign at the very beginning, on the day he cleared the Senate hearings and was sworn in as Secretary of Homeland Security, his immediate predecessor, Jay Johnson, phoned me to say, you may already know, but Secretary Kelly has now been confirmed, and I just want to tell you he is a very good guy, and he will serve well in this post, and you can expect to have a good relationship with him. So when administrations are changing, parties are changing, and the predecessor says that about the successor, I think that's a very positive indication, and that has certainly been my experience. We've had border issues to sort out in the course of the last little while, and the working relationship is strong. I think it's trusting, and there's a lot of goodwill around it. We're working on one set of issues that has both security and economic implications, and that's expanding the pre-clearance system. Pre-clearance is that system whereby you go through customs and immigration before you leave the country of departure, so that when you land, you are in effect the same as a domestic traveler. There's no more clearance or inspection or lineup to be done. You're treated as if you're a domestic arrival. And we've had pre-clearance between Canada and the United States since the early 1950s. And it's available at 8 airports in Canada now: Halifax, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto Pearson, Winnipeg. I pre-cleared coming to the United States today at Winnipeg International Airport.
At dark 30 this morning?
Yes, in the ice. We actually had to de-ice before we left Winnipeg this morning. I think it was just a strange dew point and the cold fuel that put a frost on the wings, but anyway.
That makes people from Minneapolis feel a little better, because it is glorious here today, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
And Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver, the total of 8. And that's for passenger service only. We have now entered into a new agreement where we're going to try to make it expand to several other airports in Canada, where it will be all transportation, not just air, and it will work in both directions, but from Canada going to the United States, from the United States going to Canada, which will be a great advantage for travelers moving in both directions. Obviously, it's important that the border officers on the job doing the work be properly trained and conduct their responsibilities appropriately, but it's a great advantage for the traveling public. What is even more exciting from the economic point of view is the commitment made by President Trump and by Prime Minister Trudeau when they met back in February to say, let's expand this to cargo. Not just the people travel, that's important, and we need to do that properly, but can we do pre-clearance in cargo, where rather than going through all of that customs work at the border and the long lineups and the trucks across the bridges and so forth, can we not find a way where the inspection is done at the plant immediately after the product has been manufactured, put it on the truck, inspect it, seal it, and send it across the border without any further administrative procedure standing in the way. That would be a very good advantage for Canada-U.S. trade moving in both directions to make our border more and more successful. So the President, the Prime Minister are committed to that. And I notice in testimony to the Senate committee a couple of months ago, Secretary Kelly had some very positive things to say about border operations with Canada. He indicated that it was an arrangement between Canada and the United States at the border that was built on a lot of trust, a lot of effectiveness and goodwill. It was working well, and that the objective would be to make the border even thinner. Secure, but thinner. So
I agree with everything you said. The pre-clearance is really important. Everybody has on their chair here a book that says Common Ground, Uncommon Friendship. It's kind of our CABC's annual report, and you'll see in there we talk about how important pre-clearance is. David Bradley, the Canadian truckers, and I have been working on this for more than a decade, so it's a good idea. Your ambassador, David McNaught, Canadian ambassador to the U.S., said in an interview with the Canadian press the other day on this issue that he's a little embarrassed that it's taking a while to enact it. Because what I would observe, for Americans in the room, we're used to government running at a glacial pace, right? Our system of checks and balances, our division of government is designed to be inefficient. It's really slow, and it's really hard to get anything done in Washington, okay? So we're used to that, and we designed it that way. Our founders designed it that way because they were worried about stuff. Parliamentary democracy, when you've got a majority, in contrast, you can get things done lickety-split. It's very efficient. So my question to you is the pre-clearance agreement that you talk about, I think was started in 2011, agreed to by previous governments, agreed to again, and then the U.S. Congress, in a surprising and positive move, enacted the enabling legislation that can put this thing into effect, and we're still waiting for the Canadian legislation. So in the politest way I can ask you, what is taking so long?
Well, it's the political process, but we're almost there. As you say, the negotiations started, I think, in 2011 for a broader pre-clearance arrangement. It was concluded in the spring of 2015. Our election came along in the fall of 2015, so we picked up this initiative where it had been left off by the previous government. We concluded the details of the new arrangement in the spring of 2016. The legislation was introduced in June. It has gone through the parliamentary hoops now, at least on the House of Commons side. That process should come to a successful conclusion this week. It was reported back from the Standing Committee to the House of Commons on Friday, I believe it was. So it still has to get through the Senate side of the operation. But it is just about concluded its path through the House.
So this fall we'll have it? Is that a recap? Okay.
Yep. That's our goal.
Okay.
Yep.
I testified on this just for people's benefit in a couple of standing committees, and we're a business organization. We want commerce to go effectively back and forth across the border, and what I didn't anticipate in the questioning from your colleagues from the House of Commons, various parties, was people were really worried about strip searches, and the question that they asked me was, could I get strip searched by an American, officer? And I thought, if you're getting strip searched, whether it's a Canadian or American, it's not a good day, So what's the big deal? It's important that our law enforcement are able to act professionally and all of that, but whether it's a, Canadian official or a U.S. official, it seems to me you're subject to the same kind of scrutiny, and it's not a fun day if that's happening to you.
And the advantage to Canadians traveling to the United States, the advantage is the process of clearing customs and all of those procedures that need to be gone through when you're crossing the border will happen before you get on the airplane or before you cross the border, still in Canada, under the umbrella of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Right. So for Canadians, you get all of that happens while you're still at home. And we're solidly for it. It will help business.
And we're looking for the opportunities to have, for passengers, not just cargo, pre-clearance going back the other way.
Canadian snowbirds in particular. So in Arizona and in Florida, where you've got a lot of Canadians for some reason enjoy going to Arizona and Florida in the winter. I haven't quite figured that out. But when they're coming home for the summer, they could clear if they could clear customs.
At places like Minneapolis or Chicago or Boston.
Yeah, sure. Why not? So I'm hoping that people are writing down some questions. So they're coming. So if you want to hold up your cards, where's Sean Fitzgerald? Here he is. Sean Fitzgerald's going to pick up your cards. And while he's walking around, I've got another question for you, speaking about the border and things getting back and forth across. So everybody see this backdrop? Isn't it pretty? It was designed last week by my colleague Kyle and produced in Canada. And we had an event last week in Atlanta at the Carter Presidential Center with President Jimmy Carter and Prime Minister Joe Clark. And so this backdrop is supposed to arrive the day before. Okay, and it's going via Federal Express, another good member of the Canadian American Business Council. It's supposed to arrive the day before, and FedEx is like clockwork pretty much all the time. Now this backdrop has, you can't see it, but it has some kind of metal poles in it, that help set it up. And so it's the night before the event. We're doing the walkthrough at the Carter Presidential Center, and the team is a little panicked. Where's the backdrop? Where the heck is the backdrop? And so we're talking to Federal Express. Our good friend David Short, who's in the FedEx Washington office, who fields questions like this probably from members of Congress, looks into it. And the answer we get back is it's being held at the border, at the U.S. border, coming in from Canada, because there are pieces that are aluminum. And the Trump administration has launched an investigation into aluminum and steel coming from foreign places for potential national security concerns. So, and this was interpreted at the border as hold up my backdrop, which I'm pretty sure it wasn't geared toward. So we got it just in time. Thank you, Federal Express. That long prelude while we collect questions and cards leads me to, Sean, we've got people up here that are looking for you. That leads me to the question about this investigation that the Trump administration launched a couple weeks ago. It's called Section 232 of the Trade Act that says foreign aluminum and steel will be investigated to check to see if it should be a national security concern. I'm pretty sure that was geared towards a country like China. But it affects Canada in many ways, not just my little story, but in lots of other ways, as Canada is a major supplier of aluminum and steel to the United States. So I just want to ask you kind of what your sense of where that is. Are you worried about it? Is it going to be okay? What's your thought about that issue?
Well, we think it's going to be okay. We'll obviously have to very vigorously advance and defend Canadian interests. And we'll do that, at least in part, by pointing out, in the case of steel, for example, the integrated nature of the North American marketplace. And the fact that steel companies have made decisions about, steel and pipe companies have made decisions about where to locate their various operations on various sides of the border to achieve the most efficient economic result. And they have generally looked at all of North America as their marketplace. In the supply chains, there are many border crossings that go back and forth before you get to the final product. But just to think of one practical example, there's an important North American steel company, has its head office in Chicago, but has a plant in my hometown in Regina, and has other plants in different parts of Canada and other steel plants and pipe plants in other parts of the United States. And they have developed this business model and this configuration because it allows them to conduct their business in the most efficient, cost-effective manner. And they are producing at various locations and selling to all of North America, selling to the world. The company wants to expand in Colorado. Create a new plant in Colorado, probably somewhere between 500 and 700 jobs in Colorado. which would be a very good thing for Colorado, a very good thing for the company. But the company has to make a profit out of the plant in Regina in order to make the investment in Colorado. And if for some reason the flow of the business flow within that company to be able to access the entire North American market, if that were somehow interrupted, then there'd probably be 500 to 700 jobs lost in Regina and 500 to 700 jobs that would not be created in Colorado. So it's in everybody's interest for the integrated nature of this marketplace to be recognized. It creates jobs and business on both sides of the border.
It does. It does. Thank you.
And we should, I think, be concentrating our effort where you indicated. For both of us, the issue is not the other party in North America. The issue is the steel product that is being dumped on both of us from countries offshore. That's where the issue is.
Absolutely. And, we would go even further and say, when you're thinking about Buy American, or you're thinking about country of origin, you're thinking about border adjustment taxes, all those things that are being kicked around in Washington, from our point of view at the Canadian American Business Council, we say, why don't you make it Buy American Canadian? Like, that would solve a world of these problems. All right, Minister, we have a lot of really good questions, and we only have about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to try to get through them quickly. So let's call this the lightning round.
Okay. We'll try. The questions will not be the problem. It's the answers that...
We agree. So here's the first one. Please comment on Canada's relationship with Russia and how it is affected by the U.S.-Russia relationship. Good question.
Now that's an interesting question.
You got the Five Eyes getting together, right?
Yeah. Obviously, Canada wants to play a useful role internationally, but we have recognized challenges most recently vis-a-vis Russia, and we are concerned. We will be alert and vigilant in areas like cybersecurity, for example. We want to make sure that our systems in our country, as well as the integrated systems that operate across the North American continent, are safe and secure. We will find opportunities where we can to cooperate and to build good relationships, and the Arctic sometimes provides an opportunity to do that for countries like Canada and the United States that share that geography with others, including Russia. But at the same time, we will not be naive. We will promote and defend our own vital interests and make sure that the Canadians are secure. And when we're called upon to show that kind of leadership and participation in the world, like our Four Corners obligation that we've just undertaken in Latvia, or the support of a fragile situation in Ukraine, we will do that and stand up for the principles in which we believe.
What's your greatest, you mentioned cyber, and I wonder what your greatest security concern is, and this person wonders that too. What keeps you up at night, Minister?
Well, certainly cyber does, because, I mean, it's such a rapidly changing dynamic. It's driven by technology that is so rapidly evolving with every passing minute, and our systems in Canada and in the United States are attacked. Somebody's trying to hack them, whether that's within government or within the private sector, the banking system, telecommunications, whatever, like millions of times a day. And we have remarkable systems, resilient systems that are defending our cyber infrastructure. But the pace at which that science and technology is changing leads you to be concerned, like, are we going to be able to keep up with all those who are trying to cause mischief and and to penetrate whether it's your healthcare system or your banking system or your government communication system or whatever. Cyber is a field where we need very close international collaboration. We need to figure out how we govern our respective defensive mechanisms, how we invest in the right technology to make us increasingly resilient, how we get the private sector fully engaged, because some are, but some aren't. Mm-hmm. And in cybersecurity, you are only as secure as your weakest link.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we're all in this together, government and the private sector, in the right kind of governance arrangement seamlessly, because one little seam, one little gap could bring down the whole house of cards.
Yeah, we had a conversation last week in Dallas with former President George W. Bush, 43, and cyber came up there as well, and his view of it was that we're kind of in a new world of mutually assured destruction, meaning, cyber hackers in China today could probably take down our electricity grid or pieces of it, but we could do the same to them, or banking, or pick your poison. So that it's really it's sort of a new Cold War, but it's not just between two great powers. It's all over the place, and it's scary.
And it's not just state actors.
Right.
There
Absolutely.
are military actors. There are rogue actors.
Yeah.
There's everything from organized crime to petty thieves to mischief makers to just some strange geek in his underwear in the basement who's trying to change the world.
Now, the U.S. has a proactive kind of cyber warfare strategy, if I could call it that is about disrupting operations. We've read about those that have been reported in newspapers, Stuxnet, things like that, with the Iranian centrifuges. Does Canada have a proactive cyber warfare strategy, or is it more defensive?
We are examining all of the issues related to cyber. The Prime Minister asked me to conduct a cyber review over the course of the last year. I've done that. The Department of National Defense has also been examining these issues in the context of the Defense Policy Review in Canada. The Defense Policy Review was published a short while ago. We have some other pieces to put into place, but we will be announcing the new Canadian position just as soon as we have all of those policy deliberations done. Sometime
this year, you think?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, let's switch gears entirely. And this is not in your portfolio, but it's fair ball because you guys can ask anything you want, and I'll read it. What is Canada's plan on dealing with environmental issues such as global warming?
Well, we believe very much in the principles that were endorsed and adopted by the whole world at the Paris Accord a year and a half ago. The challenge is enormous in dealing with climate change and the consequences of climate change. So we have announced our pan-Canadian policy framework for dealing with climate change and also for achieving cleaner, more sustainable economic growth for the long term. And we are sticking to that policy as the vast majority of countries around the world are. I think there are now only two that are officially out, which would be Syria and Nicaragua. And the United States has announced its intention to leave with the greatest of respect. We think that's a mistake. And we will continue to argue in a principled way that the world has to come to grips with this phenomenon, or it will be very, very bad for all of us, not just environmentally, but also economically.
And I would note that the Prime Minister of Canada phoned President Trump and said, just so you know, same message you just gave, which is we're going to respectfully disagree with you and we'll continue to work together in other areas.
Interestingly enough, the Canadian Parliament voted on this issue a week ago, and there was one contrary but the House voted otherwise 100% with one dissenter in favor of sticking with the Paris.
Sticking with Paris, wow, that's quite a statement. Okay, we're all over the map here, and I'm just reading. These are not my words. Many folks from Mexico and Central America feel traumatized by President Trump's call for mass deportations. How welcoming is Canada to receive people leaving the United States? You talked about it a little bit in your opening, and I said we'd come back to it later, and this is the perfect opening. Let me just expand on the excellent question. Canada has been welcoming to Syrian refugees. Canada has a pro-immigration cultural dynamic that I think is different from the United States as a sort of general statement. And I think this questioner is articulating something that's really real. People are fearful, and they don't know what's going to happen to them. So that's manifesting itself in people leaving the United States and perceive Canada to be welcoming. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, the Prime Minister has made that very point in his public statements, both on social media and directly in many other fora, that Canada is a country that is welcoming in terms of immigration and in the circumstances that qualify with refugees and asylum seekers. We have rules and procedures that need to be followed. In the case of the Syrian refugees, for example, a year and a half ago, that was part and still is part of the largest dislocation of humanity since the Second World War. Greater international migration caused by a variety of things, not the least of which is the terrible disruption and terrorism in the Middle East. And so people are desperately fleeing those circumstances to find peace and security and an opportunity somewhere else. Canada made the commitment that we would try very hard to receive within a certain time period 25,000 refugees. The number at the end of the day was higher than that, over 30,000. And it took a little bit longer than we expected. It took 4 or 5 months instead of 2 or 3. But at the end of the day, we made sure that we were able to accomplish that important global humanitarian objective with full respect for safety and security. We set up a system that involved layers and levels of screening and processing that made sure that we were able to accomplish that relocation of people in a way that was safe and secure, that all the rules with respect to Canadian immigration and refugee procedures were completely respected and followed. We believe it's important to follow the rules, but when the world is facing this kind of disruption, and in some places it's famine, in some places it's the consequences of climate change, in some places it's other issues. If you don't find the way in the global community to come to grips with that kind of an issue, if you just hunker down and tell people just to go away, you are making the world not just less humane and kind, but you're making the world more dangerous.
More dangerous, yeah.
More dangerous.
Yeah.
You have to find the way to accommodate the migration, to make it work in a sensible fashion, and that takes broad international cooperation. Canada's determined to do its part, as I think we have and we are and will continue to do, but it's a global obligation.
Well, thank you for that. Let me ask 2 quick follow-ups on this topic. Let's stay with it for a second. Your brilliant Chief of Staff and I were talking a couple weeks ago about...
She really is pretty good, eh?
She really is terrific, yeah. She's embarrassed right now, and she's mad at both of us. We were talking, and you sort of touched on it, but I want to get to it specifically. People who are fleeing the United States for whatever their own reasons are, it seems that there's a phenomenon that they're going to Canada and they're not going through the port of entry because I think there's something called a third country agreement where if they come through an official port, you have to turn them away. But if they get into Canada not through an official port, if they're going through like a farm field or up a creek or something like that, and they land in Canada, they can then claim asylum or something like that. Isn't that sort of a perverse incentive? And don't you worry about that? There were stories all winter about people with not the right clothes, in the winter, going to Canada. So do we need to do something about, first of all, is that true? Do you have to turn them away if they come into the port? And if it is true, should we look at another policy approach to that particular agreement?
Well, the Safe Third Country Agreement has existed between Canada and the United States for the better part, I think, is the last 15 years. And the arrangement essentially says if you are an asylum claimant arriving in North America, you need to make your claim for asylum, your refugee claim, at the first country, in the first country that you enter. In other words, if you arrive first in the United States, you make your claim in the United States. If you arrive first in Canada, you make your claim in Canada. But
what if you suddenly decide, for various reasons, that you can't live in the United States anymore because you're scared and you go to Canada? Shouldn't you be able to go through a port of entry?
We have that arrangement, like all public policies, are constantly under review. What is interesting is that none other than the United Nations High Commission for Refugees has said that the asylum system in the United States is functioning well, historically and now. And the UNHCR has made it very clear that they do not assess a reason why one would change the judgment or the opinion that has underpinned this policy for the last 15 years, that it is still valid and workable. That's the opinion of the UNHCR. And that's the assessment or the judgment of the Canadian Immigration Department as well.
So, I'm just going to take one more run at this, because the actual question, though, and maybe you answered it by saying we're reviewing it, is if somebody is fleeing the United States to go to Canada, there is a disincentive to go to the port of entry. Is that a good idea, to send them through some farmer's field?
Well, it's important for people to be well informed about what they are doing. It is not a good idea to try to cross a field in northern Minnesota when it's 35 below.
Yeah.
And we've made that point abundantly clear. It's not only against the law. It is dangerous.
Yeah, yeah.
And people need to be informed that when you get to the border in that fashion, that it's not a free ticket to Canada, because when you cross the border, you are apprehended by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Your biographical and biometric identifications are collected. There's a check against every Canadian and American database for an immigration issue or a criminal issue or a terrorist issue, any of those things. If there's a danger to the public, you can be detained. And you are then taken before the IRB, the Immigration and Refugee Board, and they determine the status of your claim for asylum. If it can be verified, then if you have a legitimate asylum claim, then you can remain in Canada. If it's not, then deportation proceedings begin.
Really?
It is far better to follow the rules and go through the ports of entry in a proper legal way that's defined in the procedure. Now, people are obviously going around that system.
Yeah.
So what is incumbent, I think, on both sides of the border is to make a very strong effort to understand all of the deep-seated reasons why that may be happening.
Yeah.
And it's not just one reason, because the roots of this migration started early last year, long before there was any election.
Really?
In the United States. Yes. So there's not just one source of the issue here, and it is important to understand all the nuances. Because, as I said earlier, the integrity of the border matters. And when people begin to doubt the integrity of the border, then there are more hostile attitudes that begin to develop about newcomers, and that is not a good or a healthy thing.
Thank you, Minister, for that, for helping us understand that. We unfortunately only have a couple more minutes, literally a couple more minutes, and the last related question, I think we know the answer. I think you answered it. This might be quick. But is it true that individual provinces are able to get their own immigration policies? And if so, within what limits? I don't think that's true, is it?
There are two subject areas under the Canadian Constitution that are shared jurisdictions. We have two sections in our Constitution, 91 and 92, that says the provinces do this, the federal government does that. And in most cases, it's a very clear line. You're either one or you're out, or the other. There are two that cross over, agriculture and immigration. Those are the two. Generally speaking, because the federal government has all of the apparatus and the institutions of international relationships, it is the federal government that takes the lead. But in some cases, some provinces want to be more assertive and be more involved